So I promised you I was going to draw pictures, and I will. I just had to clear some crap out of the way. I was running out of time on that last video. So I decided to disassemble this and add a few extra things into what we've got going on here. But let's go back a ways. You remember my inch 350 shoulder madness, in which I feel that because an action measures inch, generally an action measures an inch 350, and most recoil lugs measure between an inch 30 and an inch 350. And so many barrels are smaller than that. I'm worried about deforming the shoulder on this little barrel out here. So I've been talking about how we beef this up. We put a bigger sliding sleeve on here and then we epoxy it in place. All of this is about the control of these mystical vibrations I keep talking about. It goes back to my tuning fork, which you can't hear anything here, but that's beside the point. Anybody with any musical background knows what a tuning fork is, and it resonates consistently. This happens to be an A on 440 hertz. So you can tune a guitar with it, but it doesn't matter. And we also know, anybody who's been around music, that if you ring a tuning fork and then you put something on it, hey, you might have heard that. I don't know. Anyway, it went meh, and it died. You put a weight on one side, it kills the whole tuning fork. You do anything, and especially if this weight or this thing is loose. But the point is, if we're trying to build a system of barreled action tied to a stock that acts as a tuning fork, if that's valid, may or may not be, but for whatever reason a bench rest gun works. I contend that it's because it's a tuning fork. Your shoulder goes back here, barrel, stock, vibrations consistent. Now, these muzzle devices we're talking about can be like putting a damper on a tuning fork. This is why I have to say I wanted to go a little further here and build a few more pictures. This barrel joint thing is number one about resisting motion of this joint so that the barrel resets. It is also number two about maintaining the vibrations through this assembly, getting it to tighten up tightly enough that not only can it not shoot loose, as in boom and move, but also that it can vibrate and vibrate and vibrate. Now, anybody who's been around nuts and bolts and cars and machinery understands that nuts and bolts tend to vibrate loose. The fact that they tend to vibrate loose says one thing. While the effect may be small per second or per cycle or per unit, over time bolts and nuts will vibrate right off their shafts and a baler will break down out in the field. What that means is, if it occurs over time, then it's also occurring by the nanosecond. It's also occurring every shot. To get a gun to shoot under a quarter minute and get down to where it even begins to be tunable, this kind of stuff has got to be taken care of. So on this end of the barrel down here, we've got the barrel joint. We've talked about how we're going to take care of that. We've talked about the stock. We're not going to mess with the trigger. We're not going to mess with, even though I have in the past touched on scope affixment. Right now we're talking about muzzle devices, and I've taken this muzzle device apart just to show you the various spots, and we can draw some pictures here. If the barrel comes down like this, and it is threaded, okay? Now we add on this piece right here, which slips over the barrel, goes down and engages in the threads, goes up, comes to a stop over the barrel. It's apparent that this end here up against the gun barrel, this end here is just floating here. Blah, 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 ring, 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 zzz, zzz, buzz, 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 killing vibrations. So this can't be doing any good on this end. Now we get up to the abutting surfaces, and this is hopefully where this thing starts to lock up. These abutting surfaces continue on. These first 3 or 4 threads here hopefully lock up, and these first 3 or 4 threads here hopefully lock up. And the muzzle brake continues on forward, flopping around crazily as if Sammy Sosa had hit it with a baseball bat. Bam, 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 bam. So the spots that we have at our disposal to lock up, on a fixed muzzle brake, we've got the muzzle of the gun. We can do a collar here that's a tight slip fit, which simply by fact that there must be a tolerance on this parallel section which slides into an adjacent parallel section. Let me draw that. Now we get to the end of the threads, and we can go down and we can make a parallel section. This parallel section can then be tightly slip fit into something inside the brake. And let's just say this is where one of the holes in the brake occurs. But if there's something, this can be fairly tightly affixed right here, but just to get it to slip in this collared area, which I'll attempt to illustrate here, a collared area, just to get it to slip into that surface, which is of course here, it must have some tolerance which allows for motion. Now any guitar player knows that when you're fingering down onto the fretboard, any looseness, anytime you pick your finger up, it buzzes. You can hammer on, hammer off, stretch, do all kinds of things, but to get a good tight note, you got to bear down. You got to make sure that that string is buried against whatever it is that it's riding across. Well, the same thing is true here. Because there's some tolerance in here, let's just say that's no good because it's not a compression fit, it's not an airtight fit, it's a buzz fit at best. It's like you're playing a guitar and you back your finger off and all of a sudden that string starts to buzz against the board. That's the best that you can get here unless you deeply jam this. Now, you can get that slip fit, then put a taper, then jam it against something in here. And if you use the old Mauser system, when I was in gunsmithing school, my teacher was a man named Franz Achleitner, and he had been schooled in the old country at Verlach and others in Austria. And so he was a Mauser fanatic. And Mausers, the old 93s and 98s, were set up with 3 collaring shoulders. And the 2 main ones, down inside the action, you were supposed to run up against an abutment collar. And then as you tightened the action down, you were supposed to, I'm not going to even try to draw that here, but trust me, there are 2 main abutment sections in a Mauser action, whereas on 99.9% of all the guns that you ever see in the world, there's 1 abutment surface. This in here is literally just floating in space. But a Mauser's got a step here and a step here. This one's got a pretty good sized shouldering abutment, this particular barrel. But there's no reason. So what we're trying to do here is get things together tightly enough that under tremendous stress, they don't buzz, they don't shake. And the things that we've got to hold to, the things we've got to work with here on the muzzle brake are select. Now, if we want our muzzle brake to time out correctly, it's really hard to get these shoulders to bury because thread compression, there's just a ton of reasons why timing a muzzle brake with flats on it is really, really hard in this situation. Even if you're butting in 2 spots, which is the best that you can get, you can absolutely affix a muzzle brake by jamming and cramming up in this area at the end of the muzzle and jamming and cramming back here, provided 2 things. And here's where the problems come. This is what we're doing. We're trying to eliminate problems. I've got this particular barrel threaded at what I consider to be the minimum diameter that I would want to go on here, because this happens to be, I won't name it, but it's a button rifle barrel, and there's a contention, true or not, I pin these, and I've never actually found a change from here to here, but I don't do big steps. That's not exactly true. I actually have a barrel that is 920 at the muzzle with a little half 24 muzzle brake affixement. The guy who put it together cut it all the way down to take a half 24, 20, whatever the half-inch ones are. So it's got a tremendous step here, and on that barrel, where the step is to like 50%, we're talking a 300 thousandths high shoulder here. Yes, I can run pin gauges into this end and meet refusal right at the end of the threads. That particular barrel absolutely has expanded. So I never do that. So we have the jamming surface up here, but back here we're limited in our facility because if we make too big a step here, a big jamming step, we risk this being small enough that the bore expands. So I'm bringing these things in just to bring you up to speed on some of the things that we think about when we're talking quarter minute and less rifles. So if we jam this, the problem is timing. At the point where it jams down to, I don't know, 30, 40 foot-pounds, this thing is probably rotated to the wrong place. It's not where we want it. We want to be able to jam down in the real world. We want to be able to jam down and get it dead level and up to the poundage we want. So this is a problem. Having two is a problem. I've timed a lot of them. As I said in the last video though, having watched the work of 50 other people and having gotten a lot of guns through here with these flat muzzle brakes on them of all different types. I'm using, this is a Herald that I flattened off myself. I just milled it top and bottom just to give it a place to put a wrench on. And to make it look a little better. I think it looks better. So that said, anything with flats, those flats in my mind must be exactly flat to the scope. It also gives you the facility that you can run levels up here. You can do cool things. You can extend this flat up, put a level on. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But to make it look semi-attractive, we've kind of eliminated this as a jam point for our adjustment thing. This is going to get looser, tighter, looser, tighter. We've kind of eliminated this because we got a slip fit, so that leaves only this center joint in here. Now that's not perfect. That can move. That's kind of the reason I got away from barrel nuts. Because a barrel nutted assembly tends to move, in my opinion. Let me put it this way. Harold Vaughn introduced me to something called the old engineer's trick, in which you exacerbate problems. Let's say you're wondering if tip damage changes the way a bullet flies. Instead of dinking around out here on the ME-Plat, take a file and cut that thing off. Cut that off at an angle way back here. Now send it through the air with a big old... Now we've accentuated the problems of balance and of wind resistance, and now this bullet's going to fly through the air and we can all guess what it's going to do. What's that going to do to the BC? What's that going to do to the accuracy? The difference between Harold and most people in this world is, number one, he speculated and then he followed up. He didn't just guess. He speculated, then he followed up with experimentation. Now this is important. This is the difference between talking and doing, people. This is why I'm sharing all this with you. If you're one of those fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of the population that actually wants to do things and make a difference, this might be for you. Because we are here to do things, come up with ideas, spark our mind into ideas. So here we are, we're stuck with these clashing together and locking up right in here. This in here is basically floating and flopping. This end back here is basically floating and flopping. So, but we have a pretty good lockup right here. And I contend that if we goober this full of some sort of an epoxy, could be a steel bed, could be JB weld, could be Roxat. But regardless, I've gotten these guns. Now here's where it gets tricky. This gun right here is chambered in something this is a 300, I believe, with a WSM reamer run in deep to make my blown up 300 IUM style that I'm calling the 300 Hellbringer. because I think it's cool and I'm a redneck and I love cool things. You know, I have a tendency to put flame jobs and speckly paint, and you know, I know how to lay down metal flake like a bad dog, because back when I was doing metal flake, the chunks were as big as your knuckles and you had to float them. Anyway, none of that. I'm into the cool, so I think it's cool. So I'm going to introduce a third thing, a third aspect. I have found, well, where I was going is, first of all, it's really hard to test these big dogs naked. This is why I'm building a whole bunch of little guns. I can test them naked with no muzzle device. Establish that they shoot. Then I can put muzzle devices on there and say, shoot, no shoot. In a small system. All these big systems can do, this big 300 here is just going to double and quadruple the forces that are acting, the problems. Especially here, we've lost in two ways. We've got a smaller barrel, small diameter barrel, huge impulse. We've got the butt end taken care of with our big inch 350 shouldering. We're locked up there. We're good all the way out to the muzzle. Now, shooting these big guys without a muzzle device, without a good break, with some surface area, will break your shoulder. Nobody's that tough. To shoot these guns up to capacity, this is like a 1,000 horsepower race car. You can't just go drive it down to get groceries. You're just carbon it up and die in the ditch on the side of the road. You pulled the thing off the shoulder with a hole through the piston because it's designed to be run. These are the same way. This huge case is designed to be run. The powder has to burn at certain... It doesn't even burn right unless the pressure is there to excite it, to cause it to burn, to make the whole reaction work, all right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when that powder over there is doing its work, it's pounding you. It's pounding your shoulder. So it's really hard to test these big dogs naked because you can't take the recoil. And no, you can't put it in a lead sled or back it up against a concrete block or stick your dog behind it or any of these other things. You can't even get your big fat buddy to come and shoot it because it's going to tear him up just as bad as a little skin. I've seen some tiny bony little guys take recoil better than 380-pound giants that you would think you could punch with a baseball bat, but in simple fact, they're made of flesh and bone just like the rest of us. So it's about sucking it up, which is hard. Big bodies don't get out of the way as easy, so you get punched harder. Medulla elongatus is the thing that happens with these. It snaps the back of your neck so hard that you get pain in the medulla. So what I'm saying is they must be tested almost with the assembly on, otherwise you can't shoot them. So what I have done though is taken some lightweight systems, got them to shoot, and then put this apparatus on, locking this up very tightly in here. Now this needs to be held with maybe a vice grip, lightly gripped with some, I use aluminum straps or even fingers, and then this gets tightened against it, okay? It will always be wrong. So you back it up and you advance this a click and you do it again. You do it again until trial and error gets you with your poundage down to where you're flat. And you've got a truly good lockup right here. And so far I have not been able to prove that that is not locked eternally and forever. So far I have been able to get this assembly to shoot, especially on small stuff. Now you get up into the big stuff, the jury's still out. We're testing, testing, testing. In the meantime, because I'm weird like that, I'm also playing with all different kinds of tuners and tuning devices. And I'll put it into this video because the prior one showed some, and here's something completely new. Another thing that a person can do, and I'm going to go there, is take some collars, a bucket of collars here, and instead of turning this all down, leave it big and flat and square, and now run a collar up against it. Now you've got this tightened up. Perhaps we can eliminate some motion back here with a collar. Then also perhaps we can take a second collar, and by using feeler gauges we can loosen this collar and we can move it back and forth. Now we have a tuning device. Work with me here. Tuning device. See? Put it all together in your head. I'm not even going to draw any more pictures. I've got the parts laid out here. Then glue it all together, of course leaving this movable. These you can buy for a couple of bucks on the internet. And by using feeler gauges, I think you can make a workable tuner. This is where I'm going with it. So, that's something to think about at least, guys. And since we're wrapping this up, I'm just the other day, one of the videos that came out just a few days ago, I'm using this aerosill and I'm mixing epoxy and I'm making it into a thixotropic mixture. I'm changing horses here, big time. It's funny because a couple of other projects I've got going on, it got cold outside and I had to move some stuff around. Somebody asked me, where do you get this aerosill or cabosil, this fumed silica? I said, TAP Plastics, T-A-P Plastics. Most big towns have a TAP plastic. I use this, and I also use these microspheres. These are two things I use in my epoxy quite a bit. Well, then that person asked, how do you, well, you can buy it like this, and it's like 20 bucks, but for 30 bucks, you can buy it like this. And this is a big bag, but it doesn't weigh anything, as you can see. This is some lightweight stuff, guys. And back here is the fumed microbead. I just thought it was funny to show you these. This is Silberico. Doesn't matter. I think I'll have enough for this that if any of all y'all are ever in my area, swing on by. Swing on by. I'll give you some. I got enough here. I have enough aerosill that it should last me my lifetime. The only other project I've got going right now, this is kind of funny, kind of cool. I got a couple of minutes here. I'll show you. This is another, remember the Teslong? Everybody needs a Teslong? Well, everybody needs one of these too. Your dentist uses one. You must have it. Right now, I've got an old 721 here, useless to me. 30-06 bolt face, well it was a 30-06 or a 270 or something. But with this right here, I can eyeball down into here and I can grind out the little pegs that keep the extractor from rolling. I can turn these old guys, cheesy old action, worth about nothing, 30-06 bolt face, worth about nothing. Nobody wants 473 bolt faces. But by turning that extractor, I can turn this into a drop port. The ejector's gone. You can take one of these old things, and as long as you got yourself a pair of eyeballs that you can see in there, you can go in and grind these little tabs off, spin that around, and turn that. I'm just trying to throw ideas out, guys. That's my job, all right? Think about that. Take that. This happens to be an old 721. I'll be turning into a 6.5 Creedmoor, drop port, left feed, blah 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 blah. Fun. That's what this channel's about. Get her done.